When we talk about the no contact rule, most people assume it's just about going silent, cutting off communication to create absence and, hopefully, a sense of loss in the other person. But here's the uncomfortable truth: silence without inner transformation is just noise in disguise. If you're still energetically chasing her in your mind, playing back old messages, rehearsing imaginary conversations, checking if she's online, then you haven't gone no contact, you've simply gone invisible. And invisibility does nothing to her ego if she can still feel that she lives in your head. What really dismantles a woman's ego isn't your physical disappearance. It's the energetic withdrawal. It's when she no longer feels your emotional presence clinging to her. And that starts with reclaiming your energy, not to weaponize it, not to get revenge, but to restore your sense of self-worth. Because the deepest blow to someone's ego comes not when you disappear, but when you evolve, quietly, internally, and without needing them to witness it. A lot of men think they're doing no contact, but what they're really doing is waiting for her to text, waiting for her to regret, waiting for validation to prove that she still cares. That's not no contact, that's emotional suspension. And as long as you're suspended in hope or resentment, she still has power. Ego feeds off attention, even unspoken attention. So if your silence is filled with emotional noise, she feels it, and her ego stays intact. But something powerful happens when you stop waiting, when you stop performing, when you shift your energy away from proving a point and toward building yourself, not for her, not to make her jealous, but because you deserve a version of yourself that isn't tethered to anyone else's approval. You start to move differently, your focus sharpens, your posture changes, you stop reacting, and whether she sees it or not, she feels the absence, not just of your voice, but of your emotional investment. This is the kind of withdrawal that breaks ego, not coldness, but absence of dependence. You're no longer orbiting her world, and now she's left wondering why, wondering if you've outgrown her, wondering if she ever really had the grip she thought she did. That's when doubt creeps in. That's when ego starts to fracture, because nothing shakes a person more than realizing someone they assumed would never walk away already has. So if you're going to go no contact, go all the way in. Not just in silence, but in energy. Reclaim your thoughts, reclaim your time, reclaim your peace, and when she finally does notice you're gone, it won't just be the lack of messages that stings, it'll be the absence of power. True power isn't in disappearing, it's in detaching so completely that your silence echoes louder than your words ever could. Most people underestimate just how powerful emotional indifference can be. We live in a world that glorifies emotional intensity, love harder, fight louder, react faster. But here's what's rarely discussed: the ego doesn't shatter from confrontation. It fractures in silence when it meets something it can't control. And the most disarming thing a man can offer, especially to a woman who's used to holding emotional power, is calm indifference. Now, indifference doesn't mean coldness or cruelty. It's not about being rude, dismissive, or putting on a mask to appear unaffected. That's still a performance, and deep down, it's still anchored in needing her to notice you. True indifference is when you no longer feel the need to convince, correct, or even care about how she interprets your silence. You've emotionally disconnected, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, and that clarity unnerves her. Why? Because women, especially those who are used to being desired, learn to read emotional cues like second nature. She can sense when a man is still seeking her validation, even if he's saying nothing. But when that energy disappears, when the air feels neutral, not tense, when your silence doesn't beg for attention, but simply exists, she's forced to confront a reality where she's no longer the center of your emotional gravity. At a deeper level, this taps into something philosophical. We all crave relevance. The ego feeds on the belief that I still matter in your world. But when a man becomes emotionally indifferent, that belief begins to crumble. She starts to question. Has he moved on? Does he feel nothing now? Was I just a chapter in his story? That internal questioning is far more damaging to the ego than any argument or dramatic eggs it could ever be. Here's where the shift happens. Indifference becomes a mirror, not one that reflects blame or resentment, but one that shows her what she no longer has access to: your energy, your admiration, your emotional investment. And in many cases, especially for someone who relied on your emotional pursuit to validate her own worth, that loss becomes deeply unsettling, not because you punished her, but because you outgrew the need to react to her. That's the essence of emotional power, not in making noise, but in creating silence so still, so unshaken, that it leaves the other person echoing in their own uncertainty. So, if you truly want to dismantle her ego, stop trying to teach her a lesson. Stop orchestrating outcomes. Instead, master your internal state. Let your emotional neutrality be the space where her expectations collapse, because when she realizes you're not angry, not hurt, not hoping, just done, that's when the ego starts to break. The most devastating message is the one never sent, but fully understood. Be that message. Here's something most men overlook: becoming visibly successful, genuinely, quietly, undeniably successful, is far more effective at disarming a woman's ego than any form of direct retaliation ever could be. You see, when a woman expects you to wither after she walks away, she's not just imagining your absence, she's imagining your decline. She's subconsciously hoping that her withdrawal affects you so deeply that your life stalls without her. So when the opposite happens, when your life accelerates, flourishes, and evolves, that's when her perception begins to collapse. Let's strip this down to its core. At the center of the ego is the belief, I made an impact that can't be replaced. That belief is only reinforced if you remain stagnant, emotionally, socially, financially, after she exits your life. But when a man rises, when his presence begins to command more respect, more admiration, more peace and power than ever before, it forces a shift in the narrative. She's no longer the climax of your story. In fact, she becomes a footnote. That realization is what truly bruises the ego, but this isn't about spite. This isn't about leveling up just to prove her wrong. That's still reactive energy, and reactive energy still places her at the center of your motivation. What I'm talking about is transformation rooted in detachment. You grow not because of her absence, but because you've remembered who you are in her absence. That distinction is everything. Real power is quiet. It doesn't need announcement. When you start dressing better, speaking more purposefully, aligning with people who elevate your thinking, when your goals begin to materialize in real time, it doesn't go unnoticed. And even if she pretends not to see it, believe me, she feels it. Because when you were emotionally entangled, she had access to your energy. Now she only has access to your image, and that image is thriving. And here's where the ego starts to flinch, when you move on without bitterness, without shade, without theatrics, but with purpose and poise. It becomes impossible for her to feel superior. The ego wants to be remembered as irreplaceable. But success has a way of rewriting memory. It reframes past relationships, reframes what was lost, and more importantly, reframes who truly held the power. It's also worth mentioning that this form of growth doesn't just impact her, it impacts you. Because once you realize your best self emerged after someone left, you begin to understand something deeply liberating. No one else is the source of your evolution but you. So here's the truth: you don't have to clap back. You don't have to beg. You don't even have to explain. You just have to build. Let your success say everything your silence doesn't, not because you're seeking revenge, but because you've returned to purpose. And remember, ego can survive arguments, silence, even distance, but it struggles to survive your evolution, become undeniable. That's the quietest way to win. One of the most overlooked ways to completely disarm a woman's ego, especially after you've initiated no contact, is by stepping into a space of emotional neutrality. Now, this might sound counterintuitive because we're conditioned to believe that strength comes from intensity, anger, coldness, stonewalling, but true strength, especially in emotional dynamics, comes from the ability to remain unaffected. And this is where most men fail. You see, when a woman walks away or creates distance, a part of her expects a reaction, maybe even craves it, not necessarily because she wants drama, but because attention, even in conflict, still feeds the ego. The ego survives off relevance, so when you enter a space where you no longer oscillate between love and resentment, where you stop trying to decode her every post, every look, every silence, that's when you disrupt her expectations at the core. Now, emotional neutrality doesn't mean you become numb. It means you become grounded, you stop reacting, you stop assuming, you stop chasing closure in places where it's been deliberately withheld. Instead, you begin observing everything from a place of clarity without judgment. You start making decisions that are not influenced by hope, fear, or past intimacy, but by truth. What this does is fascinating. It creates a vacuum because ego is used to being either adored or resisted. But it doesn't know what to do when it's met with indifference, not bitterness, not love, not hate, just indifference. That emotional stillness becomes deafening. It forces a person to confront themselves without your energy distracting them. You reclaim your power when you no longer feel the need to perform emotionally for someone else's validation, when you no longer offer your energy in reaction to their actions, and this neutrality is powerful not only for dealing with her ego, but for rebuilding your own sense of identity. It gives you space to think clearly, to recalibrate your standards, to reconnect with what you actually want. Not just what your emotions have been conditioned to crave, and here's what happens next. She begins to question the story she told herself about you. That you were weak, that you couldn't move on, that you'd always be emotionally available, even from a distance. Your neutrality challenges that narrative, and when her ego is no longer being fed, it begins to shrink. That's when the dynamic starts to shift. Not because you chased, but because you stopped giving it emotional oxygen. So if you're in no contact and wondering what more you can do, don't text her, don't stalk her socials, don't vent about her to mutual friends. Just be still, emotionally still, focused, clear. In that silence, in that emotional neutrality, you're not just preserving your dignity, you're forcing her to face the version of you she never prepared for. Let your stillness speak, because sometimes the loudest message is sent by the man who no longer needs to say a word. There's a particular kind of power that comes from transforming pain into purpose. And after a breakup, especially when you've gone no contact, most men don't realize how crucial this transformation is, not just to heal, but to shift the dynamic entirely. Key point 5 is all about this shift, reinventing yourself in a way that she no longer recognizes. That's where the ego gets rattled. Let's be honest. When most women walk away, they do so with a quiet confidence that the version of you they left behind will remain predictable, stuck, waiting, reflecting her decision back to her through your stagnancy. What crushes her ego isn't anger. It isn't sadness. It's evolution. It's seeing a man she once had full emotional access to become someone who no longer fits the box she placed him in. Reinvention isn't about becoming someone entirely new. It's about shedding the parts of yourself that were only there to please her, the habits you picked up to keep the peace, the parts of your personality you dimmed so she could shine brighter, the goals you delayed for the sake of the relationship. When you begin to strip those layers away, what emerges is a version of you that isn't bitter or broken, but better, sharper, more focused. This shift isn't loud. It's not about announcing your progress to the world on social media. That's still rooted in ego, in performance. True reinvention is quiet. It's in the way you move, in the way your energy changes. It's in the discipline you apply to your fitness, your business, your passions. It's in how you speak, not to impress, but with intention. It's in the fact that you no longer operate from a space of proving your worth to someone who walked away, but from deeply knowing that your worth was never diminished by their inability to value it. And here's what makes this so effective: when she hears about you from someone else, or stumbles across a glimpse of your life after her, it's no longer a continuation of the same story. It's a new chapter, and she's not in it. That stings more than any silence. That shakes her ego more than any message you could have sent. The woman who thought she knew you now sees a man she no longer understands. And the truth is, people are unsettled when what they thought was permanent begins to evolve without their permission. That's when curiosity kicks in, regret creeps in, and the pedestal she placed herself on starts to wobble, because you're no longer the man waiting for her return. You've outgrown the relationship, and in the process, outgrown the version of yourself that accepted less than you deserved. So don't just go no contact and wait in silence. Use that silence, mold it into momentum, become someone so refined, so elevated, that she's forced to reconcile with the fact that leaving you was the worst miscalculation of her ego. Reinvention is the art of moving forward without looking back. Be that man. Let your evolution speak louder than your absence. There's a final move often underestimated that strikes directly at the heart of her ego. And that is choosing not to compete for her attention anymore. Now, I don't mean ignoring her or playing hard to get. That still centers her as the prize. What I'm talking about is a deeper psychological shift, removing her as a point of reference in your life altogether. You see, the moment you stop orbiting her world, even energetically, it disrupts the internal narrative she's told herself about you. Most women, especially after initiating distance or a breakup, expect some form of pursuit. Maybe not immediately, but eventually, whether through subtle texts, emotional check-ins, or by watching your life from a distance. They anticipate signs that you still see them as significant, that you're still in the emotional race. But when a man detaches not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, that's when things begin to change. You stop responding to her breadcrumbs. You stop decoding her Instagram posts. You stop tracking whether she's watching your stories. And more importantly, you stop making life decisions based on how they might affect her perception of you. You choose not to prove anything, and here's why this matters. The female ego thrives on the assumption of desirability. It's not vanity, it's validation. When that validation quietly disappears, when the eyes that used to follow her now look elsewhere, there's a void, a silence, a lack of emotional reassurance that she didn't even realize she depended on. That's where the cracks begin to form. Now understand this. It's not about revenge. It's not about withholding love. It's about reclaiming your center. Detachment doesn't mean you no longer care. It means you've placed your peace and purpose above her approval. And ironically, this form of inner strength is what many women find most magnetic, but often only when it's too late. When you stop competing, you send a message: I'm not in the business of chasing what doesn't choose me. You rise above the emotional economy of likes, messages, mixed signals, and passive attention seeking. You opt out of the game entirely, and the irony, the moment you detach from the need for her validation, you become more powerful than any text, call, or confession could ever make you. Because now you're not responding from ego, you're responding from growth. Let her wonder. Let her ego sit in that stillness. Let your absence carry the full weight of your new standard. Because a man who no longer seeks to be seen by the one who left, he sees himself more clearly than ever before. And that is the final blow to her ego, the realization that you've not only moved on, but evolved in silence, with zero interest in being seen through her lens again. So if you truly want to shift the dynamic, stop trying to win her back. Win yourself back, and let her watch from a distance, as a spectator to the man she could have chosen but never truly valued.